Welcome back to our midweek Bible class. We are in Luke chapter 22, starting at verse 47. A lot of these stories are familiar to us because we just went through the Easter season. Although this is being recorded in mid-February, it is going to be played the last Wednesday in April. So the story should be fresh in your mind. Verse 47, he is where we are now. Luke leaves out a lot of detail that the others put in because the others were present. Luke later works through interviews and puts his book together. So we know that the time of praying and waking up the apostles went on for a while. Luke just has it as one discrete episode. And then right after Jesus talks to them, then the mob's at the base of the mount. We would call it a hill, but in Israel, that's a mountain. Where it is, Mount of Olives. While he was speaking, suddenly a crowd came. The one who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus said to him, "Judas, is it with a kiss that you're betraying the Son of Man?" When those who were around him saw what was coming, they asked, "Lord, should we strike with the sword?" Then one of them, we know who that was, it was Peter, struck the slave of the high priest and cut off his right ear. By the way, he wasn't aiming for the ear. That's just the way it happened. People lost ears and noses a lot in battles back then. If you were wearing a helmet, which the servant might not have been, and if they were, it was probably just a leather helmet. Swords often would hit and then slide down and cut off an ear. Jesus said, "No more of this." And he touched his ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priest, the officers of the temple police, and the elders who had come for him, "Have you come out with swords and clubs, as if I were a bandit? When I was with you day after day in the temple, you did not lay hands on me. But this is your hour and the power of darkness." Excuse me. What he says in that last bit is easy to read and move on, but there is some real depth to it. He's looking at them and saying, "You're cowards. You could have arrested me any time, but you were afraid because I was surrounded by people who believe and by good people, people who are ready to move to what God has prophesied for hundreds of years. And you know about those prophecies, but you want to keep your power. You want to keep it so much that you've decided the only way you're brave enough to come to get me is in a mob." There's a rule about mobs. The larger the mob, the lower the aggregate IQ. It's absolutely true. You have, and you can start small. You have one troubled teen. Generally speaking, they'll cause a little trouble. You get 3 troubled teens together, and their IQ drops, and they cause trouble, which is stupid and easy to catch. You get 10 of them together, you see how this goes. You get a mob. You say, "You got your mob out here, and you got swords and clubs to get little old me. Now, you could have done this anytime, but you're cowards. And the only reason you're doing it now is because you're under the cover of darkness." Fact is, darkness is the home of evil. That's where we get to do evil and think we're unseen. And by the way, they're all forms of darkness. I can remember I was probably no more than 5 or 6, and we were driving in a car, and there was a low-slung building off to the side with probably concrete or pebble clad or something, and it had little windows in it with beer signs lit up. And I said, "What do they do in there?" And my dad says, "They go and sit in the dark so they can drink." Well, oversimplification perhaps, but have you ever been in some of these places? The lights are turned down low for a reason. And darkness, evil loves darkness, always does. It's like cockroaches. Doesn't like it when you turn the lights on. And these cockroaches were coming after Christ. There's another form of darkness, though, and that's the darkness of anonymity. And people use that all the time on the internet. They're able to hide, to cloak themselves. They can be whoever they want to be. They can say who they want to be, and then, ta-da, I am. And then they can attack you, and they can Google, and their Google or their AI, that's supposed to trump your many years of university or your life of living good, and they'll go after you for no reason. We have a Facebook page for our community and also for our city and also for the traffic in our city, because our city has more than doubled in size in the last 10 years, but the roads have not really changed. So the traffic's bad. And every so often, somebody will, you know, run a red light, and somebody will have a picture of that and say, this person ran a red light and nearly ran over me. You know, they've got one of those dash cameras and they're able to pull the footage. Or they'll just say, it took me an hour to do 20 miles today. And others will come in sympathy, or maybe say, here's another route, or, you know, we pass this on to the police. But there will be a host of people. Oh, you silly little person. Everybody, you know, why are you whining? Or, you know, if you don't like it, then move. You're part of the problem. And just bile and anger and such. I find it on forums for guitars. Somebody will ask, you know, it's obviously a new person, and they're saying, I've got this guitar and I need to change the strings. What kind of strings should I buy? Well, there are a ton of guitar strings out there. And so people will chime in and they'll say, that kind of guitar, you might want to try this, you might, but there will be people pop in. We've talked about this so many times. People are so stupid, they can't do a simple search. And I'm going, why would you do that? They can do it because they're in darkness. They got a computer and a keyboard between them and the world, and it keeps them cloaked. If you won't do it in the daylight with cameras on you, don't do it at all. If you will not say it to the person to their face, don't say it at all. How hard is that? How hard is that? It's one of the reasons why you find if you've ever followed me on Facebook, I'm absolutely zero politics and zero preachiness. I just don't do it. I don't do any of the virtue signaling of, here's why I stand for the thing which is noble and right. I don't do any of that. No, because sometimes saying you stand for what's noble and right is a way of saying the rest of you are wrong. And if you're not going to say that to their face, well, let's just not do that. So again, that's a form of darkness. And this evil loves darkness. It's where it moves. So they seized him in verse 54, led him away, bringing him to the high priest's house. But Peter was following at a distance. Remember Peter? Remember back in the last chapter? Okay. When they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat among them. He's right there with the group that took Jesus. Then a servant girl, seeing him in the firelight, stared at him and said, this man also was with him. But he denied it, saying, woman, I don't know him. Yeah, Peter probably was trying to get close to make sure what was going on, you know, see when he could move to protect Jesus, but then he's spotted. And like I said, in the last chapter, you find out they are now outlaws, because if you are with Jesus, you are treated as an outlaw. That's in verses 35 through 38 of this chapter. I keep saying last chapter. This is a long chapter of this chapter. What are there, 66 verses in this one, I think? No, 71. There you go. Jesus says, you're now going to be hunted like outlaws. Well, yep. A little while later, someone else on seeing him said, you are also one of them. But Peter said, man, I am not. Then about an hour later, still another kept insisting, surely this man was also with him, for he's a Galilean. But Peter said, man, I don't know what you are talking about. At that moment, while he was still speaking, the cock crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. You see, he was right there in the crowd with the high priest and all the others, trying to act like he wasn't with Jesus. Jesus is standing right there. He's heard all of these denials. He's heard all of the commotion. The Lord turned and looked at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he'd said to him, before the cock crows today, you'll deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. Now the men who were holding Jesus began to mock him and beat him. They also blindfolded him and kept asking him, prophesy, who's that struck you? And they kept heaping other insults on him. How can people be this cruel? Oh, don't be surprised. We've always found people willing to be this cruel. They're everywhere. We have, and again, this is being recorded in February, a judge looked at a man who had, I have to use different words on YouTube, had attacked a woman in a vicious and intimate way repeatedly. And this was not his first time. He had also done this with other women. He had also tried to kill other women. And I hope that word won't get me taken off. He had done all of those things repeatedly, been arrested, charged, bailed, put back out, and during the trial, shouted abuse at his victim, words I cannot use and will not use, even if I'm not on YouTube, about how he, when he gets out, is going to hunt them all down and do this and that to them. Was sentenced to 65 years in prison, and the judge says, well, you know, he's probably suffered in his life, cut it to 30, which means he could be out in 20 or less. What? What? That's insane. That's cruelty. Listen carefully. Mercy to the criminals is violence to the victims. But we have people that are violent to victims in that way by saying, oh, let's give them another try. So people that are arrested 37 times are still on a bus in Charlotte and kill a young Ukrainian immigrant. And everybody's going, oh, wow, didn't see that coming. Mercy to the criminal is violence to the victim. Well, here you will find people that will say, well, you know, we need to really stop this rebellion. You'll get people say, I'll beat them, I'll shoot them, I'll hang them. And they have fun with it. It is still a matter of shame and shock in Europe that so many of their grandfathers were happy to be part of the Holocaust, enjoyed it. The pictures of them smiling and laughing by the piles of bodies. You will find them everywhere. You find them in America, you find them in Africa, you find them in Southeast Asia, you find them everywhere there are humans. There are subhumans among us who get real joy in being able to be bigger than the other guy. And so mob an old man on the street and kick him, 5 or 6 of you guys, kick him together, and that'll make, you know, hey, look at us. They are everywhere. That's why I kept telling you last week, keep your head on a swivel, get your head out of your phone, look around, know what's there, because these people are here. So don't be surprised when we find them. And here they're throwing, you know, a blindfold or a bag over his head, and then they're hitting him and saying, hey, you're a prophet. Who hit you? Can you tell? They're having a ball with this. For cruel people, this is fun. Just like dog fighting or cockfighting or bull baiting or any of that, or bear baiting rather, or bullfighting, any of that. This is fun for them. When the day came, that's sunrise came, the assembly of the elders of the people, both chief priests and scribes, gathered together, and they brought him to the council. They said, if you are the Messiah, tell us. He replied, if I tell you, you will not believe. And if I question you, you will not answer. In other words, what's the point? But now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God. In other words, you do what you want to do. Nothing I say is going to stop it. But you need to know you're going to see me again at the right hand of God. All of them asked, are you then the Son of God? And he said, that's what you say. Now, Matthew and Mark make it much plainer. But Luke has it saying, all of them said, are you the Son of God? And he goes, that's what you as a collective say. In other words, they knew. But just like the parable of the wicked sharecroppers, they thought, yeah, it'll be a great, horrible sin if we kill the Messiah, but God will forgive us. He always forgives us. And we'll get to keep the kingdom, the vineyard in the story. As ridiculous as that sounds, that's what they're saying. Then they said, what? Well, we know, by the way, Luke leaves it out, that immediately someone struck Jesus and said, how dare you speak to the high priest that way? But the man who spoke wasn't the high priest that year. He was the father-in-law of the high priest, and he was supposed to have been rotated out as high priest. He was a former high priest, supposed to have been rotated out, but he refused to give up. So he still kept the title and reigned as high priest with his son-in-law. Yeah. Chapter 23. Then the assembly arose as a body and brought Jesus before Pilate. Interesting factoid here. It used to be that people said, well, Luke got this wrong because there was no proconsul, there's no governor of the region called Pilate. That's never, and Romans kept great records, so it's never, it never didn't happen. But then they found a big floor as they were excavating for something else and found laid in there a tile that this was laid by Pilate, the governor of Judea, these years. And then since then, they found a lot of other records of Pilate. So once again, Luke is verified as perhaps one of the preeminent historians of ancient or even medieval times. They began to accuse him, saying, we found this man perverting our nation, forbidding us to pay taxes to the emperor, and saying that he himself is the Messiah, a king. All right, let's look at the charges. He is perverting our nation. He's causing unrest. He's not sticking with the standard story of Rome. Well, that could get you killed in Rome. Number two, forbidding us to pay taxes to the emperor, an outright lie. Do you remember they tried to catch him with that? And he said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. Give to God what belongs to God. So it's an outright lie. The next one, saying that he himself is the Messiah. Pilate wouldn't have been less interested in that. He had zero interest in whatever religions anybody wanted to follow. But then they added a king. That'll get your attention. Because you have to deal with Herod and you have to deal with the emperor. And the emperor is supposed to be over all the kings, and Herod's supposed to be a king. And this could seriously disrupt the peace of Rome, which was the greatest crime you could do, because that they didn't want that. So if you messed up with the Pax Romana, they killed you. So you see them laying this out. Pilate asked him, are you the king of the Jews? He answered, you say so. Wait a minute. We know that Pilate's wife had a dream warning her, do not mess with this man. There have been some private conversations. And Pilate knows about Christ and has even said aloud the possibility that he is king. That's the only reason he would say such a thing. Jesus would say, you say so. Then Pilate said to the chief priest and crowds, I find no basis for an accusation against this man. This would have been after a long interview. We don't get the long interview because nobody was in there. And Luke works off of primary sources. And there are no available primary sources. But they were insistent and said, he stirs up people by teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee, where he began, even to this place. Well, that's not Pilate's problem. You can teach wherever you want to teach. But since he's from Galilee, Pilate sees an escape hatch, because that's not in his jurisdiction. Technically it is, but there's a king over that, Herod. When Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. When he learned that he was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him off to Herod, who himself was in Jerusalem at that time. Okay, Pilate's well shut of him there. That'll take care of things, won't it? Not exactly. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he'd been wanting to see him for a long time, because he'd heard about him and was hoping to see him perform some sign. Entertainment. You know, like the beating and humiliation was an entertainment. This is supposed to be another entertainment for Herod. Hey, I hear you do tricks. Do some tricks. And the old Andrew Lloyd Webber, Jesus Christ Superstar, which I've never actually seen. I've just listened to the music quite a few times, so I know the songs in it. It's one of the more inventive songs, and the ones that stick in here about Herod is so excited to see Jesus, and you hear the excitement in the song. He'll say, walk across my swimming pool, do any of that and I set you free. I had a feeling it was kind of like that. Well, he questioned him at some length, but Jesus gave him no answer. Jesus didn't have a constitutional right to remain silent, but he realized, time to be silent. I'm not going to dignify this with an answer. I'm not going to dignify Herod with an answer. But also, have you ever noticed that whenever people tried to trick Jesus or question Jesus, that he always won the discussion? And he's supposed to lose this one. He's supposed to go to the cross. So he doesn't fight. He lets it happen. That's some real courage there. That's a boatload of courage right there. The chief priests and the scribes stood by vehemently accusing him. Even Herod, with his soldiers, treated him with contempt and mocked him. In other words, you're not going to play by my rules? Well, then we're going to play with you. And they did. They put an elegant robe on him, and they treated him with contempt, mocked him, put an elegant robe on him, and sent him back to Pilate. That same day, Herod and Pilate became friends with each other. Before this had been enemies, because now they're in this together. Politicians, right? Pilate then called together the chief priests, the leaders, and the people, and said to them, you brought this man as one who is perverting the people. And here I've examined him in your presence and not found this man guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us. Indeed, he's done nothing to deserve death. I will therefore have him flogged and release him. Now, if you're thinking, wait a minute, if he's innocent of all charges, why beat the man half to death with a whip? To keep people happy? That's the way Rome did. We're going to show you, hey, we like you. Sorry that you came up with a completely false charge, but just, to make it up to you, your consolation be, we'll beat him half to death. That was Rome. That was the world in which they lived. Then they all shouted out together, away with this fellow, release Barabbas for us. This was a man who'd put in prison for an insurrection that had taken place in the city and for murder. So these people are willing to let a murderer and an insurrectionist loose, but not Jesus. We know from the other Gospels that it was customary at this time to release a prisoner to the people for Passover as a way of making nice with the populace. And he was going to say, well, I'm just going to release Jesus. And they go, no, you don't. No, you don't. Release Barabbas to us. Pilate, wanting to release Jesus, addressed them again, but they kept shouting, crucify, crucify him. A third time he said to them, why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no ground for the sentence of death. I will therefore have him flogged and then release him. But they kept urgently demanding with loud shouts that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. We know from the other Gospels that they said, we'll tell the emperor that you let a man that was perverting the nation loose and to keep his job. You see a little theme going here with the powerful? To keep his job, he is willing to throw away an innocent man. Don't let this shock you. There have been a lot of politicians who were pro-life until they decided to run for a higher office and then became very much pro-abortion. They were more than willing that 1 million babies die a year if that gets them into office. We've seen it time and time again. One of the most famous, I'd have to say, is Al Gore. He wrote extensively for pro-life. He spoke for pro-life until he decided to run for vice president, and then he switched. But there are a lot of others like that. Willing to throw away lives as long as I get my job or keep my job or get my money. Beware. Keep aware. Well, Pilate gave his verdict that their demand should be granted. He released the man they asked for, the one who'd been put in prison for insurrection and murder, and he handed Jesus over as they wished. What a crime. What a crime. As they led him away, they seized a man, Simon of Cyrene, most likely a black man from North Africa, who was coming from the country. And they laid the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. Why would they do that? Because Jesus had evidently fallen. It was typically required that the crucified man carry their cross, at least the back timber, on their shoulders. But Jesus had already been beaten and flogged, we found out in the other Gospels, to the point where he couldn't stand up and carry it. After a while, though, they made him take it back. A great number of the people followed him, and among them were women who were beating their breast and wailing for him. But Jesus turned to them and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For the days are surely coming when they will say, 'Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if they do this when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry?" He's talking there about what's going to happen in 30-something years when Jerusalem falls. It could have been avoided. All of it could have been avoided. But Jerusalem, the Jewish system, and the Jewish religion as it was at that time will be over. Everything will be broken and people will be scattered. What historians call the diaspora. It is a mark in history which it's indelible. It's kind of like 1066. Everything changes at 70 AD. So much to say. But we're coming up with about another 4 minutes, so I'm going to do one more part of the story. Two others also were criminals, were led away to be put to death with him. When they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Jesus was forgiving everybody there, not just the ones crucifying him, not just the ones baying for his death. He was forgiving everybody. Could you have done that? I'll answer for me. I can't answer for you. No. I've been calling down the angels. I know me. I'm not that strong. I would have been calling for the army of the angels to strike, for this to be over, and call this a bad experiment. Hey, we gave it a go. Jesus is not me. He's so far above me, there are no words to describe. They cast lots to divide his clothing. Why would they do that for scraps of cloth? Because scraps of cloth were hard to come by. And I can go to Walmart and buy 20 rags for washing the car for what, $2.50, $3. They didn't have those options. Everything was precious, even scraps. And the people stood by watching, but the leaders scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others, let him save himself, if he's the Messiah of God, his chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourselves." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who were hanged there kept deriding him and saying, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and us." Remember, everybody knew Jesus, even the criminals. But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you're under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we are getting what we deserve for our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." He replied, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." The word there means the Garden of Eden. You're going to be back where you belonged before the fall. You'll be there. Why? Because Jesus has already forgiven everybody. You'll be there. This man didn't deserve it. He didn't do any acts of great repentance that we see. Certainly don't have record of him being baptized or going to church or tithing or doing any of the other. He doesn't even say, "Forgive me." He just says, "Remember me." Jesus says, "You'll be with me. It'll be good." What an amazing Savior we have. Well, listen, we need to stop here. I hope you've enjoyed it so far. It's a hard story, but I hope you've enjoyed us walking through it. Thank you so much for supporting us and subscribing and sharing and hitting the bell. And thank you for feeding us, giving us petrol in our tanks so that we can drive and visit other house churches and get to know you better. God bless you. I hope that you have an amazing week, and we'll pick up this story the next time. Right? Cheerio.